From the shadows of the cathedral's stable, Marcus frowned out dubiously at the streets baking in the midday sun. Around him, the paladins assigned to Calling County made their preparations, packing away additional supplies from the city and taking their horses back out. Many came to him with questions, and he could feel the tense undertones delivered with each one. It was not the same tension that they had held upon their entry to the Sorcerer's Kingdom. With their objectives in hand and life in the Sorcerer's Kingdom awaiting them, none of them wished to be deemed unsuited for their duties. They did not voice their thoughts on the existence of the Sorcerer King, but a quiet sort of conviction had settled over the entire contingent, speaking volumes on its own. There were surely many odd customs and practices in this foreign land, but no one wished to leave. Rather than leaving, they would fight to remain a part of it. Knowledge changed so much, yet so little at the same time. Their duties did not differ in light of potentially world-changing revelations, neither did the tenets of their faith or the routines that lay ahead of them. All that was to be done was to carry on as always. That look does not become you, Captain Marcus. What look do you speak of, Captain Lorenzo? You have become too introspective by far since coming here, Lorenzo told him as he entered from the corridor. There is much to think on, to be sure, but I do not believe that this brooding look will serve you well in your role as captain in Calling County. Was there truly a need for two captains? If anything, it spoke of Bishop Hostine's plan for expanding the temple staff in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Not only would they have multiple squires for every temple guard, but hundreds of acolytes were being trained between all of the temple's facilities across the duchy. Most of it was being done in Calling County, where the greatest population of the faithful resided. The numbers presented in his assignment currently had a single ordained member of the clergy for every 5,000 of their faithful, which was a dire ratio indeed. It was hoped that, at their projected rate of training, they would have a priest for every 1,000 of their present-day congregation within the next 5 years, then a new class of acolytes graduating every year following. This was assuming that the theocracy did not send any further assistance. Like acolytes, squires took roughly the same amount of time to complete their training, but they required far more personal attention than their priestly counterparts. The new paladin order could only ordain one set of squires every 5 years, but their ranks would still reach a respectable size within 2 generations. They didn't even have a name for the order yet, despite the ambitious undertaking. How much information was included in your assignment about Calling County? Lorenzo asked. Not much, to be honest, Marcus answered. We learned more about the territory by traveling through it, which I suspect was the intent. It was a strange, yet eye-opening experience. They lack so much that we take for granted in the theocracy, yet it appears that their faith shines all the brighter for it. There are none of the brash and audacious attitudes we might expect out of the insular common folk of the theocracy, none of the aggression against heretics, infidels and inhuman races. It is strange, as if we have stepped through a mirror into another world, yet these people are undeniably our faithful. Lorenzo slowly nodded, stroking his mustache. Marcus did not know just how much his old friend had come to believe, but his response to the bishop indicated that at least some of the thoughts that passed through Marcus' mind had also gone through his. In that case, Lorenzo said, what will you do? I admit that I had a fairly good sense of what we would be doing in any event, but my approach to things feels so hollow now. You too, eh? I only have rough ideas now, to be honest. Bringing the ideologies and attitudes from the seminaries and military academies of our home will probably not work very well here. In their daily lives, these people have learned to practice their faith in a way that is alien to us. Their culture, so much is familiar, yet it is not the same. It is probably best to stick to the simple things, else I might end up stumbling around like a fool. That might be for the best, Lorenzo smirked. I will also be doing more watching and listening than anything else here in the city, relying on the experience and knowledge of the temple staff. You will have the advantage in this, I think. Not only will there be temple staff to rely on, but you may be able to consult with Countess Corlin on many things. His thoughts paused at the mention of their mysterious benefactor. Loved by all, respected by all, she was held up in the same way that a figure from legends might be. This was exceedingly rare considering that she was certainly no great warrior, magic caster, or leader of armies. Going by everything he had heard of her, she was simply a noble whose rule had brought great prosperity to her lands and people. After our encounter with Baroness Gonye, Marcus said, I am wary of meeting any other nobles here, especially Countess Corlin. Gonye was no mere aristocrat, no simple bureaucratic functionary. She commanded impressive skills and abilities, as well. Well, she seemed nice enough to me. You will also not be able to avoid meeting Countess Corlin in your position. Tell me, what have you heard of her? Not much. Despite the praise and respect of her people, she appears to be just as unassuming as her subjects. There are no statues or monuments raised in her honor. The development of her land seems to be entirely for the sake of her people and their prosperity. Before coming here, I heard tales of the prideful, selfish and ignorant nobles of Riestais, yet I have noted nothing of the sort here. If not for the banners one occasionally sees in her territory, it would be easy to forget that Countess Corlin exists. Like her people, Countess Corlin seemed to live a life straight out of the scriptures. The wisdom and prudence of her rule were akin to a gently flowing river that nurtured the land. Unlike you, Lorenzo told him, I am far more curious. Did you know she already has an epithet? One earned by the time she turned 14. I did not. What is it? The Radiant Jewel of the Riverlands. Marcus frowned, unsure what to make of it. It was so lofty that it sounded sarcastic. The type of moniker one would attach to a willful brat born into wealth and privilege. A veiled insult. And just who came up with this name? He asked. Her subjects seemed to adore her so much that anyone heard uttering this epithet would probably be set upon and beaten. Usually, one would think so, Lorenzo answered, but it is a name spoken in earnest. She started helping with House Corlin's duties at the age of 8, and she was considered a blessing upon the land by the time she was 14. If that is the case, then the temples would have surely taken note of her. Did they have anything to say of her aptitudes? Her bloodline? It does not seem to be anything outstanding, Lorenzo said. She is from merchant stock, her house founded during the time of the Great Seeding. Her father was an excellent administrator, and she received the best education possible from both her house and the temples. Her family has worshipped the Six since before the time of the demon gods. Beyond her remarkable personal development, there is one other notable thing, her eyes. Are they red? Marcus was suddenly curious. No, but they are amethyst. Red eyes were one of the recognizable physical traits that suggested divine blood flowed through someone's veins. There was a folk saying, however, that red eyes and amethyst eyes were caused by the same thing. Marcus wasn't certain of the truth of this saying, but it would explain much about the mysterious noblewoman. If she were trained in some martial or caste vocation, Marcus said, we would know for sure. If that were the case, Lorenzo replied, her accomplishments thus far would be non-existent. Not everything is founded in strength. Yet it is strength that allows one to maintain a hold on their accomplishments. How convenient that the Sorcerer King with his mighty armies should show up. It was convenient enough that it was probably not a coincidence. With so much to consider, Marcus couldn't tell one piece of the puzzle from another, or what its completed form looked like. His heart ran in one direction while his mind raced everywhere over the possibilities that rose with their recent discoveries. Lorenzo reached out to clap him hard on the shoulder. Armored as he was, Marcus could barely feel it. You have that brooding look about you again, Lorenzo told him. Time to get busy so you have less time to think. I will be looking forward to your report at the end of the week. With a sigh, Marcus reached out for his horse's reins. He scanned the cathedral grounds. Have you seen Alessia? Marcus asked. I think she is preparing herself to greet the vicar, Lorenzo answered. Will you be speaking with her before you leave? From an orphan girl to a knight of Altamora. Now, she is adjutant to a vicar. What happened to the time between? No, Marcus shook his head. It is as you said, old friend, all squires must go their own way someday. Make sure she does not start a war before I come back to deliver my first report. He led his mount out to where his new subordinates awaited. Fortunately, leaving Iranthal was much easier than getting in. Taking a deep breath of the fresh air outside the walls, he did not look up at the massive statues flanking the gate. What was really going on here? His thoughts and feelings were still a tangle from the deluge of information they had taken in on their journey. If it was truly the case, how was it that only one of the 6 had returned to the world? Had the others appeared elsewhere, perhaps in the theocracy itself? Marcus hoped that this was the case, else there would be troubles brewing. Though known as a single faith, the faith of the 6 was divided into sects for each of their gods. The High Council had one cardinal that served as a representative for each sect, But beneath that, things were not so even. Sursana was known as the strongest of the six, the one most revered and feared. All worshipped him to some degree, for he was the one who stood at the end of life to render his judgment over their souls. If Sursana had returned and the other gods had not, it would create an imbalance between the sects as more and more people shifted in their convictions to become his adherents. As for what it would look like, well, he supposed that Corlin County would be the ideal image. It was peaceful, prosperous, and the people appeared to live their lives happily, but Marcus couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the other sects. Those in the theocracy would certainly not diminish quietly into nothingness. His contingent passed the crossroads, making good time towards Corlin Harbor. To both sides of the southern highway, vineyards laden with ripe fruit stretched out to the horizon. The harvest was already underway, with most of those at work being human. Soleators with wagons awaited their loads on the roads running through the landscape, while the occasional Death Knight patrol made its rounds. The paladins entered Corlin Harbor early in the afternoon, their pace slowing as they made their way through the pedestrian traffic on the way to the temple complex. Chatter rose from the contingent behind him. The paladins speculated over what sorts of homes they had been granted, the personalities of the youths who would become their new squires, and how the locals would receive them. It was a good sign, one that spoke of their focus shifting to the task ahead. A thin man in a scapular with black trim greeted him in front of the temple. "Welcome back, Brother Marcus," he said. "Or should I be addressing you as Captain Marcus?" "Brother Marcus is fine," he replied. "I would rather not be seen as putting on airs. Those who seek me for my capacity here as Paladin Captain will know who I am." "Of course," the priest nodded. "Are you in need of any directions?" "There is no specific order to our assignment," Marcus said, "but I suppose we should get settled down first. The caravaneers took care of our mounts the last time we came through here. Where should we be keeping them now?" "A pasture has been set aside for them outside the city walls. Since you're looking to get them taken care of first, we should introduce you to your new squires." Marcus looked around the front of the temple grounds. The priest motioned to one of the acolytes nearby, who nodded at his instructions and left towards a nearby building. "They're in the seminary at the moment," the priest told him. "Classes have just resumed. I was not aware that our squires were already picked out for us. Perhaps it is better to call them squire candidates. While we cannot begin their martial training without you, we can still start on their temple education. It wouldn't do to have a squire that can't read or write, or has not been properly grounded in the tenets of the faith." "A prudent course of action," Marcus nodded, "though I half wonder if we should be attending some classes as well. There are more than a few differences that I have noted in how things are done here. I'm not sure how the instructors would feel about it." The priest's lips curved into a thin smile. "Almost all of them are younger than anyone in your group here. It might be awkward, to say the least. Rest assured, we will do our best to help you with whatever we can, so please do not feel pressured to conform to our ways. I dare say that we're curious about how our brethren from the theocracy conduct themselves." To their north, the door to the seminary opened, unleashing a small crowd of boys and girls. Their eyes lit up at the sight of Marcus and his paladins. He had forgotten they were still fully equipped. The group swarmed around them, and more than a few reached out to touch their pristine cloaks and gleaming armor. This much is the same, at least. He wondered how their training would go. Each of them would be taking on 2 or 3 squires, but it seemed that their temple education was still ongoing. Traditionally, squires learned how to read and write before beginning their martial training as a paladin. Schooling was continued at the local temple where their paladin was assigned. There were 29 paladins assigned to Corlin County, with 2 assigned to each of its 14 baronies. Marcus was permanently stationed in Corlin Harbor in his role as captain. As he sent his contingent and the gaggle of squire hopefuls off to tend to their horses, the head priest came out of the temple entrance. "Did I? Oh. Good, I didn't miss you. Is something the matter? Lady Corlin requested your presence upon your return from the city." Marcus froze. He knew he would have to see her at some point, but he felt woefully unprepared at this juncture. "Right now?" It was a request, not a demand. "Is there some pressing matter you must attend to?" He glanced at the retreating figures of his contingent and the children surrounding them. If they were headed out of the town to some pasture, they wouldn't be back for some time yet. He was woefully unaccustomed to the ways of the aristocracy, and it was said that those of the northern lands were steeped in customs and traditions that were either no longer practiced in the theocracy or new ones and unfamiliar ones that had independently developed since its founding. A request may as well have been a demand, for the nobility stood near the pinnacle of authority. They had already had a taste of this when encountering Baroness Gagne. The young noblewoman did not wield her power with brute force, but with a soft hand and a silken voice. Despite this, her skill and charisma were unmistakable. He could only wonder what this veritable monster of a high noble could bring to bear. "Have you any idea what this request is about?" he asked. "A greeting, I believe," the head priest answered. "She wishes to make an acquaintance of the captain of her county's paladins." "Then I suppose I should get it over with all due respect, of course." "Relax, Brother Marcus," the head priest smirked. "I have known Countess Corlin since she was a little girl. She won't bite unless you do something reprehensible or exhibit gross incompetence. Seeing all that she has accomplished here, I fear that my best would be considered incompetent." Marcus looked around, belatedly realizing that his horse had been taken away. "We can call for a soul eater to deliver you to Castle Corlin," the head priest offered. I believe I will walk," Marcus replied. "I could use the time to collect my thoughts." He strode east across the plaza, past the town hall and up the stairs onto the highway. Gazing down at the port district as he walked along, Marcus attempted to put together some sort of coherent greeting. What little experience he had escorting important persons involved little in the way of conversation. The rest of his service as a paladin involved fighting demi-humans in various places and maintaining security along the theocracy's border with the Katza Plains. There was surely nothing interesting about that, at least not to a high noble. On the fortress island, 2 death knights and 2 human footmen stood at the gate leading west to Corlin Castle. After a thorough inspection of his credentials, he was allowed entry. Another footman met him inside the door, but rather than lead him through the gardens to the pristine white castle beyond, he bid Marcus follow him up the gatehouse. They walked south atop the wall until they entered a tower overlooking the river. The footman stood aside, gesturing towards the stairwell. "My lady awaits," he said. Marcus removed his gauntlets and his helm, tucking them under an arm. He tried flexing the tension from his cold fingers to no avail. Taking a deep breath, he mentally rehearsed his greeting, becoming increasingly dissatisfied over how insufficient it felt. His steps echoed up the tower as he made his way up the dim stairwell. He squinted as he made his way back out into the sunlight, then his eyes widened and his steps ceased. With a single glance at the figure awaiting him, Marcus' greeting flew from his mind. His breath caught in his throat and his pulse started to hammer in his ears. Before him stood a tall, slender woman adorned in rich cobalt silks. The silver lace lining her dress glimmered in the daylight, and a matching shawl trailed from her arms to trace the line of her hip. He followed the graceful curve of her pale neck to find a pair of brilliant amethyst eyes looking back warmly into his. The sun overhead played over her lustrous waves of blonde hair, crowning her in golden radiance. "This is no monster, no jewel, cold and hard and sharp. This is an angel made flesh." The woman took his fingers gently in hers, and her dulcet tones drifted through the wind. "Welcome, Captain Marcus," she smiled warmly. "I am Clara Odelia Dale Corlin, Countess of Corlin. It brings me joy beyond measure that our brothers and sisters in the faith have finally come to join us in our humble home. You are most welcome here, brother, and I look forward to what the future holds in store for us." Marcus looked down at the soft fingers wrapped around his calloused ones, feeling the heat of her touch. His mind was still blank, mouth working silently as he failed to coax out a reply. Finally, he genuflected before her, hands still gripping hers. "I am at your service, my lady." Alessia walked up and down the corridor in an attempt to calm her frayed nerves. It was too soon for her. She was too young. How could she serve as adjutant to a vicar? She did aspire to one day serve as a temple guard in the most sacred places in the theocracy, such as the all-female ranks stationed at Eye of the Water God, but there was no way that she currently had the experience or knowledge for such a lofty post. Or even her new posting in Iranthal. She would only bring shame upon everyone with her bumbling around doing things she was not qualified for. Still pacing a hole in the floor, eh? She leapt up, startled at the sudden question. Her head turned to its source as her heart pounded against her breastplate. "See Captain Lorenzo," she said. "It is not nice to sneak up on a girl like that." "Paladins can't even sneak up on a boulder," the captain frowned at her. "What worries you so, Sister Alessia?" "Everything," she replied. "Everything we have witnessed. Meeting this vicar. I am far from worthy of this posting." Alessia couldn't discern the entire truth about what was going on in the Sorceress Kingdom, but something could be seen and heard and felt in the faithful here. Even without her assignment, she knew that her life here would be very different from the one she had lived in the theocracy. And if what she suspected deep in her heart was true, being a temple guard in the Erantal Cathedral was in reality the most esteemed posting for a paladin of her faith. The thought made her stomach churn, and a nervous sweat slicked her doublet. Captain Lorenzo slowly went along the corridor, then stopped in front of the vicar's office. He raised a hand, and Alessia stepped forward in alarm. "Captain, what are you?" 3 sharp knocks echoed into the air. The captain walked away. Alessia's mouth fell open in disbelief as he retreated back around the corner, a mischievous gleam in his eye. "Yes?" Alessia froze as a voice sounded from within the vicar's office. She ran up in a panic, making some last-minute checks of her equipment. A shadow darkened the space under the door, and its handle turned. "Hello?" A young woman appeared, half a head taller than her. The black and silver garb of a senior cleric of Sursana adorned her figure. Alessia straightened, and her hand came up in salute of its own accord. "Alessia di Altamura," she nearly shouted in her panic, "Paladin of Sursana. I have arrived to Asumahuamu." Her words were cut short as the vicar's hands reached out and grabbed her cheeks. Her steely grey eyes shone, and her lips formed into a loose smile. "You're Alessia?" the vicar asked. With her mouth squished as it was, Alessia could only nod her head in reply. "By the gods," the other girl said. "My little sister can't be this cute." "Coo!" Vicar Aspasia pulled her into the room head first, shutting the door as Alessia stumbled into the room. A sharp click sounded as she locked them inside. Alessia stood very still as the cleric turned and slowly approached her. Vicar Aspasia circled Alessia several times, scrutinizing every millimeter of her as HMMs and hums floated through the air. I wasn't sure what they would send us," the vicar said, "but they've truly gone to great lengths to fulfill our request." "Our request?" "Yes," the cleric nodded. "Someone young, charismatic, fair to look upon and brimming with talent. They should possess a shrewd mind, yet have a positive and open outlook. Honestly, I thought our request impossible to fulfill." "How do you know I am all of this?" "You're not?" She couldn't say that she wasn't. Still, it felt wrong. Why had she been brought in for these qualities? Seniority, above all, ordered the ranks of the theocracy. Nothing else should have influenced the selection of a paladin who was to be the adjutant of a vicar when there were many others far more qualified. Could it be that they had ulterior motives for her? Alessia shifted uncomfortably where she stood, very much wishing she was back in the Katza Plains where life was simple and there were plenty of things to hit. Vicar Aspasia stopped in front of her and offered a warm smile. "Considering that I am the only one here so attired, there should be no confusion over who I am." "You are the vicar, yes?" Alessia asked cautiously. "That's correct," the vicar answered. "Vicar Themis Aspasia, cleric of Sursana. I would like it if you addressed me by my first name." But that is improper." The vicar's hands rested gently over Alessia's pauldrons. "I would also like for us to be the best of friends," she said. "You and I will be in one another's company for a long time, and there is much that we will be doing together." Alessia fell silent, uncertain how to reply. Her attitude was highly irregular. Was it even allowed? Their relationship was supposed to be one of sacred duty, not friendship. She pulled her gaze away from Vickers, turning it down to the floor. "Why are you asking this?" "I just stated my reasons, yes? Or do you perhaps dislike me?" "Of course not," Alessia replied. "I have not known you long enough to make up my mind either way. But it is not a matter of like or dislike. We are servants of the gods who must carry out our sacred charge first and foremost. But the scriptures do not prohibit us from becoming friends." "That is true, but—" Vicar Aspasia's smile faltered, and her hands slipped off of Alessia's shoulders. "I'm sorry," she sighed, "perhaps I have become too excited. My head has been filled with thoughts of who might be sent over and what sort of relationship we would have. When I saw you at the door, my emotions ran off on their own. I hope you will forgive me for not considering your feelings on the matter." The cleric turned away, walking slowly around her desk to take a seat. Alessia looked down at her glum expression, feeling something like a villain. She considered her own situation. Her circumstances were strange. She knew too little of her new home, and it was better to be on good terms with the vicar she served rather than remaining distant. "I am not opposed to it," Alessia said after several moments, "but I am still very confused over everything that has happened." "Confused?" Vicar Aspasia glanced up at her. "I thought the details of your assignment were quite clear." "The part about being your adjutant, yes," Alessia replied. "Though following your greeting, this is also perhaps not so clear anymore. The second part, however, I am to become an adventurer? What does this have to do with my duties as your adjutant? Beyond that, it is shameful." "I'm afraid I don't understand why you would consider it shameful." "In the theocracy," Alessia said, "the Adventurer Guild is something that only exists in the histories. They were only ever meant to temporarily shore up the security of newly settled lands. It is an organization of bounty hunters and mercenaries. They are not a proper army and cannot be relied upon. Selfish desires for wealth and glory drive them, and their loyalties are as fickle as the wind." Silence fell between them, and Alessia could not keep a dissatisfied expression from painting her face. Why was a highly trained paladin, one of excellent breeding and proven talent, being sent to become an adventurer? "I have never even heard of any paladin becoming an adventurer," she muttered. "What of Crystal Tear's fierce flash?" "That one is not a paladin," Alessia sneered. "He is scum that crawled out of a latrine pit. The rumors tell of him creeping around the Draconic Kingdom, so hopefully a beastman eats him, and then someone lights that beastman on fire." If anything, the degenerate's existence supported Alessia's case against adventurers. After a moment, her fingers came up to cover her lips as she realized what had escaped her mouth. The vicar did not say anything about her response, instead reaching to take a chain around her neck in her fingers. "Then would it help you to know that I'm an adventurer, as well?" Alessia gave the vicar a sharp look, then her brow furrowed as the cleric pulled a tag of dark violet metal out from behind her scapula. "Adventurers do not have the same reputation here as they do in the theocracy," Vicar Aspasia told her. "The Adventurer Guild of the Sorceress Kingdom is also not the same as the Adventurer Guild from your histories. It is an official government organization with the goal of true adventuring, that of exploration and discovery, in mind. They do not take up random jobs or bounties, and their affiliation is with the nation itself. Admittedly, a lot of the old culture is still pervasive in its membership, but this is something that should change with time." "But why join the Adventurer Guild at all? Temple life is busy enough, especially for a powerful cleric." "It was Bishop Hostein's idea." The vicar scratched her cheek with a slight smile. "I was a newly ordained cleric when I joined. My progress was quite shocking to all involved." "The bishop? With respect, I still do not understand why." "Simply put, we're an advertisement." Alessia couldn't keep the growing frown off of her face. "So those requirements were for this purpose?" "Yes," Vicar Aspasia told her. "I volunteered, unaware of the bishop's scheme at the time, but I do recognize the value in what I do now. Having talented and attractive young people as the face of the faith in the public eye is an undeniably effective way of drawing attention to the temples. The Sorcerer King has a vested interest in seeing the Adventurer Guild succeed and earn great renown. Having adventurers who worship the Six standing at the pinnacle of an organization that the government actively promotes is to our advantage." But I am a paladin." Heat painted Alessia's cheeks. "All I know are the ways of our faith and how to fight. I do not know how to seduce." Vicar Aspasia blinked at her blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. "You have no need to do anything of the sort, Alessia." She wiped the corner of her eye. "You are not yet 20, anyway. Neither am I, for that matter." "Then what must I do, Vicar?" "Themis," the vicar said. "When we are not conducting temple duties or attending formal occasions, please call me Themis. You were not opposed to our being friends, yes?" "Of course, Themis." The other girl made a face. "Hopefully that becomes more natural as time passes," she said. "As for what you must do, your superiors selected you for a reason. Just act as you always have, and you will most likely be known favorably through your conduct and character." The cleric reached out to take several strands of Alessia's hair between her fingers. "I suppose there is one thing you must change," Themis told her. You'll need to pay more attention to your appearance. Come, there's a salon nearby that I frequent. We should spend the afternoon there before going to register at the Adventurer Guild. A salon? Alessia's eyes grew wide. Despite its nature as a military installation, Altamura did have a few salons and boutiques. These were places for adults, however, luxurious establishments to be used by those who had come of age and were pursuing family life after establishing themselves in their vocation. Themis seemed to sense her trepidation. She reached out and took Alessia's hand in hers. Looking your very best is a part of your duty now, she told her. Let's get you out of that armor for the time being. The salon staff will have no idea what to do with it. The midday sun bore down on a group of figures making their way from Erantl's southern gate to the adventurer training area. Along the way, a man carrying a longbow drew close. That's some amazing equipment you have there, he said. Is it something you inherited from your family? The ranger, Lyndon, spoke in a tone that clearly expressed his favorable attitude towards her. Alessia resisted the urge to shyly shrink away. Since the previous day, after she came out of the salon and Themis made further adjustments to her appearance, men of all ages would openly cast their gaze in her direction. It was not something that she had to bear in Altamura, and she wondered what strange magic had been woven over her. She tried to relax, turning to reply with a slight smile. Paladins are provided equipment by the temples according to their rank and station, she replied. I am most likely mismatched with this trial, but the procedures of the guild must be observed. Mismatched? Lyndon's hand moved up to touch the silver tag hanging from his neck. I guess that means we'll be having an easy time of this. Alessia supposed that they could, but she didn't think she should be going all out. The way that the Adventurer Guild conducted their training was simple to understand. Opponents and various other challenges were laid out to test not just combat capability, but many other aspects of group operations. Paladins were looked to as living bastions in the ranks of the theocracy, so she thought that, rather than single-handedly overwhelming everything that stood in their path, it would be better to demonstrate her ability to protect her party, as well as coordinate and lead. There was also the matter of her new appearance, which she was still unaccustomed to and paranoid about marring in some way. The previous evening, Alessia left the salon only to find herself smashing giant insects an hour later. Themis found her guilt-tinged account of gingerly making her way through trying not to splatter anything on herself quite humorous, and she cast a clean spell on her after she finished. The stains and the smell clinging to her armor abruptly vanished, and the vicar told her that appearances could always be fixed. Still, she dared not do anything that might ruin her image. These trials are not solely to prove our individual prowess, yes? Alessia said, else we would not be in these parties. There should be something for everyone inside. Both beautiful and wise, Lyndon blushed as he belatedly realized what he had said. I mean. You two lovebirds back there, an annoyed voice came from the front. Could you flirt on your own time? The speaker, who went by the name of Alice, turned to face them when they reached the entrance of the adventurer training area. She was equipped in a steel cuirass over a hauberk and gambesine, giving the impression of a warrior who relied on a more dexterous fighting style. A rapier and buckler hung over her hip, and bits of her sandy blonde hair stuck out from under her sallet. When her hazel eyes crossed over Alessia, she clicked her tongue and turned away. Let's go, Alice said. Wait, Alessia called out. Should we not order ourselves first? Seems self-explanatory to me, Alice replied. We've got a fighter, paladin, ranger, druid, bard, and wizard. We should not simply assume that everyone knows how everything will work, Alessia told her. This will lead to woes in the future. It is better to gain an idea of our capabilities and settle on some basic tactics to start with, yes? Alice narrowed her eyes at her proposal. Her ire was tangible, though Alessia was not sure why. It felt part antagonism, part resentment. She did not recall doing anything to put the fighter at odds with her. Was it jealousy? This sort of competitive attitude from other girls was something that Alessia had never experienced before. It seemed there were other sorts of pitfalls that came with maintaining a pleasing appearance. That's just a waste of time, Alice snorted. We've all fought in here before, it's easy stuff. Now it was Alessia's turn to rein in her anger. She was unaccustomed to dealing with another girl's jealousy, but the flippant attitude Alice displayed towards combat operations was something Alessia had seen many times before. Alessia opted to show her hand to the entire party rather than challenge Alice directly. "We have a party ideal for a conservative advance," she told them. "With our bard using a song of healing to restore our injuries between fights, our druid can switch to offense to help keep each battle short. As a paladin, I can heal any critical injuries that might occasionally occur. Progress may feel slow, but it will be both stable and safe." "Your tactics stink," Alice dismissed her words. "This plan is going to make the session take 5 times longer than it needs to be." Alice stomped off, and Alessia jogged forward to catch up. The girl was both prideful and unreasonable. Dangerously so. She offered no counter-proposals. Instead, what? Did she think to simply smash her head into every obstacle, trap and opponent in their path? Alessia took a deep breath, flexing her grip on her shield. There were, fortunately, other answers available for unruly individuals. A dull clunk sounded from the mirror of remote viewing. The assembled proctors winced. Conveyed through the item's clear surface was a scene where an adventurer lay sprawled on the ground, though there were no opponents to be seen. Why if it is not, Alice? Yes, the one with a name like mine. What are you doing on the ground? The rest of the silver rank party gaped at the speaker incredulously. The incident had been plain for all to see. "Are you fucking with me, you bitch?" Alice snarled from where she lay propped up on her elbows. "You just hit me with your goddamn shield again for no reason." "I did?" Alessia replied in an innocent voice. "All I remember was something coming up behind me. It was so very fast, I thought it was an arrow. Or was it an assassin? Luckily, I have a nice big shield that stops both arrows and assassins." The paladin offered a hand to Alice, who slapped it away and wobbled back to her feet. Alessia shrugged and turned back around. "I wonder if another arrow will mysteriously appear behind me again in 5 minutes, she said to no one in particular. "This grass must taste very good for it to happen all the time." "It's moss, Linden," the party's ranger said. "Is that so?" As expected of a knowledgeable ranger. "I never learned the difference. Nothing grows in Katsa. Let us move on, yes?" Alessia waited until the party looked ready to continue, then motioned for Linden to lead the way. It took her exactly 2 incidents to figure out Alice's talent and its timing, Ludmilla noted absently. She didn't even let her get by the first time. "Does she have to be so heavy-handed?" Penn said. "She just smacked Alice flat on her ass, no warning or anything." "If there wasn't such a huge gap in power between them," Lawrence added, "she wouldn't have been able to pull that off." Ludmilla wasn't so sure about that. While she presented a bright and cheerful face when introducing herself to the others, Alessia's demeanor changed entirely when she entered a scenario where combat was anticipated. From the way that she worked with the other members of her party, Alessia possessed a good sense of everyone's roles and an awareness of everyone's state. With that veteran's air came discipline that she would almost certainly try to enforce, even if it required the use of martial arts. "You've all reviewed Alice's dossier," Ludmilla told them. "Her tendency to dash off and make her parties chase after her has been an issue since she's been a copper rank. No amount of discussion, reasoning or warnings have worked to rein in her behavior up until this point. It appears that a firm hand is the solution. Better this than ending up critically injured or even dead." Alice was well on her way to that result. "But I doubt Alessia knew that," Lawrence pointed out. "She just noticed Alice doing something she didn't like and flattened her." "Maybe not," Ludmilla admitted, "but she identified a problem and acted decisively to address it. She has plenty of real experience, and I think the Adventurer Guild will benefit from it." The generally free-spirited nature of adventurers combined with the number of new recruits in our ranks has resulted in us painfully stumbling our way towards developing party discipline and solid routines for our expeditions. "I don't think things are as bad as you make them out to be," Lawrence countered, "and there's nothing wrong with adventurers being free-spirited. And they're not our angst-they're members. We're not trying to form our own Imperial Legion, you know." Ludmilla wordlessly turned her attention back to the training party. It seemed that whenever topics of discipline and standards were broached, the majority of adventurers, regardless of veterancy, pushed back. The culture inherited from generations of independence and freedom in both tales and reality was carried over into the Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild by both its veteran members and new applicants. It was easier to establish sound practices back when everyone was uncertain of how things would be in the new organization, and errors were more costly. With advancement came confidence and the willingness to pursue what one saw as the ideal life of adventuring. In the past, adventurers always took on jobs, and thus risks, by their own choice. While they could no longer pick out their jobs, they still chose their own path, their own leaders, and their own methods. Success was the benchmark of an adventurer, and anything was acceptable as long as it led to success. The chaotic cycle of adventurers striving for success while also wanting to do whatever they desired had become the norm. Veteran members saw nothing wrong with it, as it was the way the guild had always been. Competition between members was what fueled the drive to improve, and training unavailable in the past was open for anyone to partake in, free of charge. To them, this was more than good enough. Lord Mayor said nothing on the matter, preferring to avoid confrontation and focusing on his continual refinement of the adventurer training area. For some reason, no matter how hard he trounced them with his training courses, the adventurers never blamed him. It was always a challenge that they had proven themselves insufficient for in some way. Ludmilla supposed it was in reality the best approach, and the talented young dark elf druid had known all along. Adventurers valued their independence and were generally obstinate, so making them face personal failures that barred their advancement was one of the sure ways of subtly forcing change. The dull clunk of Alice smashing into Alessia's shield sounded from the mirrors again. Ludmilla shook her head. It was obvious that Alessia wouldn't let Alice run off. Was it so hard for Alice to restrain herself for a single session? Maybe it is not the taste of grass, Alessia said. Could it be that you are one of those who take pleasure from pain? Why do you keep doing that? I would ask the same of you, the paladin peered at the fuming fencer. There is no discernible benefit to your actions, no plan and no purpose. You are like a farm boy with a pitchfork dashing heedlessly onto a swamp because you heard that there was a troll nearby. It is worse since no true conviction drives you, only lust for glory and empty-headed notions of what it is to be a warrior. You don't know me, Alice sneered. One does not need to know you, Alessia replied casually. Your behavior speaks for itself. How many thousands like you have I seen perish, I wonder? Eaten by ghouls, turned by wights or drained to a lifeless husk by wraiths and specters. You adventurers are fortunate to have this fine facility that should eventually beat the stupidity out of you. Most idiots are not so fortunate and meet grisly ends upon enacting their foolishness. Bullshit, Alice snapped back, you're younger than I am. How could you know any of that? How, indeed, Alessia murmured as she motioned for Lyndon to scout ahead again. The party worked its way forward, with the paladin a veritable wall that stood before any and all opponents. Despite her clearly superior equipment and prowess, she adhered to her role and expected the rest to fill theirs. Ludmilla leaned forward with interest. Unlike a regular adventurer, who would be sure to display their feats to everyone who would see them, Alessia's conduct spoke of a life of discipline where martial prowess was subordinate to the greater scheme of things. Like Ludmilla, Alessia was not a warrior who exulted in honor and renown, but a soldier who prioritized order and duty. Towards the end of the session, the party gathered in a corridor before the final encounter. For whatever reason, both the adventurers and Lord Mayor favored a climactic final battle where the opposing sides were evenly matched. They couldn't quite have that arrangement with Alessia's out-of-place strength, but some small adjustments were made to at least present challenges for the party. The last room was the grotto type. A demi-human camp was set up on a raised island surrounded by water on 3 sides. 9 lizardmen occupied the camp, and several defensive barricades had been raised. 3 mystics, Lyndon said in a low voice, 3 hunters, 3 warriors. Those 3 warriors look especially strong. Between them and their support, were probably at a disadvantage. How strong are these warriors compared to me? Alessia asked. You're stronger, but there's 3 of them and they're stronger than the rest of us. They've probably been set up specially for you. If the 3 of them can pin you down, we're still 5 against 6. We lose too many and it counts as a fail. The ranger's assessment was, for the most part, correct. The lizardmen had ranged superiority and the stronger-than-usual lizardman warriors had been brought in as a way to occupy Alessia. It was an odd scenario that wouldn't normally happen. The last time was with Elishnish a week previous, but she simply stood well away from combat and performed in a pure support role. Alessia was a frontline combatant, which made balancing the fight far more difficult. Still, the appearance of strong outsiders looking to join the Adventurer Guild was an eventuality that they needed to prepare for. Things would have been simpler if provisional ranks were handed out and foreign entries started at an appropriate level of difficulty. The guildmaster and the other veterans, however, insisted that all new members had to go through the same process as everyone else. Presumably, it was to become accustomed to the way of things and to prevent being singled out by other members for preferential treatment. Unlike the old Adventurer Guild, all it took was a few trials to catch up, so it was a small price to pay for the sake of smooth relations between members. Alessia's gaze crossed over each member of the party. Do we have a way to remove their support with our ranged attackers? With 3 hunters, the wizard replied, it will be difficult. They outrange our casters, and our one ranger won't be able to suppress all of them. Then we will use brute force. Brute force? Yes, Alessia nodded. Since adjustments have been made for my presence, it is only fair that I should use a bit more of my ability, yes? I will divide their attention and disrupt the balance of their formation by attacking first. The rest of the party maintain pressure on them from this side and strike when the opportunity presents itself. After a few minutes of discussion, the party made their preparations. The lizardmen's heads turned to watch as a sole adventurer in gleaming mithril plate strode towards them. They had little time to be confused or even communicate as Alessia's even steps quickly brought her right up to their defensive line. The closest lizardman warrior raised his battle axe. Slash. Shukuchi. Alessia's figure flickered away, and the lizardman's martial art whistled through the empty air. Shield slam. A familiar clunk issued from behind the lizardman. The first of the mystics was sent flying through the air and into the lake below. Before they finished turning at the sound, Alessia was already upon the next mystic. Her warhammer whistled out from under her shield and smashed into the side of the lizardman's knee. He cried out in agony as he collapsed onto his ruined leg. The paladin's warhammer swung down after it, smoothly going from one attack to the next. Shukuchi. The sling stones hurtling in from the lizardman hunters missed their mark as Alessia's figure flashed away again. The third mystic's snout erupted in a spray of teeth and blood as the paladin's hammer rose and crunched into her chin. Alessia reached out and grasped the fallen lizardman's tail, giving it an experimental tug. Ability boost. Attacks from the hunter's slings bounced off of the paladin's raised shield. The sight of the 160-centimeter tall girl dragging off a lizardman well over 2 meters long would have been comical, save for the words that accompanied the action. Do you think this one will wake when it hits the water? I hope I am not held responsible for the drowning. The lizardman warriors, divided between going after Alessia and keeping the rest of the adventurer party at bay, raced to stop Alessia. With a roar, the first to reach her raised his scimitar high overhead. Severing blade. Fortress. The powerful attack abruptly ceased against the paladin's shield. Alessia's mithril-shod boot lashed out and caught her attacker in the midriff. He was sent sprawling backwards but was replaced by a second warrior. This one was more cautious, testing her defenses with a long spear while the third warrior moved to flank her. They had run out of time, however. With a collective shout, the rest of the adventurer party charged forward, overrunning the now exposed hunters. With the odds suddenly turned against the lizardman defenders, the end of the fight followed shortly after. A few minutes later, Miss Bestanio appeared to clean up the aftermath. That's the martial art that you've been trying to figure out, isn't it? Lawrence asked as the proctors jotted down their final observations. That's the one, Ludmilla replied. It's no wonder you keep pushing for it, the bard said. That was almost cheating. No, it pretty much was cheating. I would say that's martial arts in a nutshell, Ludmilla smirked. That shield slam came right on the heels of her shukuchi, too. I wouldn't be surprised if she's trying to develop a third or fourth stage martial art by combining those two. You can do that? I don't see why not, Ludmilla replied. In theory, the development of martial arts is only limited by one's expertise, physical conditioning, mental focus and imagination. It's called a warrior's magic because what can be achieved may as well be. Her own repertoire of martial arts was still rather plain, the majority being first-stage techniques. Polearms had a huge range of options when it came to both personal and formation-based combat. Exploring all of the elements of her training and weaving them together into a true school of combat would be the work of many decades. How do you even defend against that? Poole frowned. 1 second, she's safely out of weapon range. The next, she's right in your face. If she manages to combine those two martial arts, you'll be on the floor before you can blink.
I think that's the point, Ludmilla replied.
If the opposing side has aggressive attackers, you'll have to reserve some of your focus for sensory arts so you can detect their attack and respond appropriately. If someone moves on you like that when you're using a bow, it's probably best to just disengage and reset the relative positioning between you. A frontliner probably won't overextend to the point that they can't respond to threats against their side. And if they stubbornly chase you around, Poole rubbed his chin, you can still put holes into their support while leading them all over the place. It's a solid counter as a ranger, but casters would still be screwed if that happens to them. That's what spells like Dimension Move are for, Penn shrugged. Druids and clerics have their own options too. Well-equipped ones are also tough enough to go toe-to-toe with a warrior of equivalent difficulty rating. Depending on the circumstances, that might be a bad trade for the warrior. This assumes that the sides are nice and even, Ludmilla said. Out on an expedition, you may run into entire tribes that decide you shouldn't be where you are. Warriors are far more common than any sort of magic caster in a race that isn't an innate caster. This level of aggression could be overwhelming when it's hundreds or thousands coming after you. While the Azalizia survey expedition had been nearly catastrophic for the Adventurer Guild, the Fiotivas expedition was almost entirely peaceful. The adventurers had chalked up their run-in with the frost giants as near the high end of difficulty relative to what they might encounter on expeditions in general, and Ludmilla was hard-pressed to say that they were wrong in their assessment. Still, all it took was running into the wrong adversaries to end up in far more trouble than expected. The proctors compared their notes one last time before splitting up to speak to the party members that they were responsible for. Ludmilla went to her usual office, settling into her seat as she quietly waited to deliver her debriefing. A knock on the door sounded several minutes later. "Enter," she called out. The handle of the door turned, and the gleaming figure of a paladin in mithril plate strode into the office. She closed the door softly behind her before coming up to stand stiffly in front of the desk. "Alessia de Altamora," she said in a clear voice, reporting for debriefing. "Defender of the High Walls," Ludmilla smiled warmly. "That's quite the fitting name for a paladin." Alessia's rigid expression brightened. "Oh, you know my language," Alessia exclaimed excitedly. "This is most rare and unexpected. To be honest, I did not know what to expect when I came here. At home, we learned that the North is a savage place full of heretics, heathens, demi-humans and monsters. This is not wrong, now that I think about it. When I first heard I would be coming here, I thought I would end up like the one in that grand fresco in Kami Miyako, standing atop a pile of corpses while slaying demons." Ludmilla had never visited the capital of the slain theocracy, or any part of the nation, despite her domain being close by. She had, however, heard of the fresco Alessia was referring to. Clara described it as heroic and inspiring. "My home is nearer to the theocracy," Ludmilla said. "The priest there taught in theocracy script. It was only afterwards that I learned the language of Riestais." Alessia nodded slowly, then her smile faded a bit. "Then I suppose that means you know the other meaning of my name. I hope I do not offend you by my being so." Alessia's name, which was affiliated with a territory and had no noble components, was particularly awkward in the north. In both the north and the south, the D in her name indicated that one bore an honorary knighthood. In the south, however, these were holy knights anointed by the temples. In the north, they were titles granted by the sovereign. She would most likely be given a hard time in Riestais for being an honorary knight with a territorial association reserved for landed nobility. A boorish individual elsewhere might use it to pick meaningless fights, Ludmilla replied. In the Sorcerer's Kingdom, however, your name should not draw the ire of the locals, nobility or otherwise. "I see. Well, you are most kind to explain this, Ludmilla rose from her seat, extending a hand. "Ludmilla Zaradnik," she said. "I occasionally serve as a proctor for the Adventurer Guild, though my duties to the realm often make me a rare sight. Pleased to meet you, Alessia." "Zaradnik." Alessia's voice trailed off, then her eyes widened. "Are you by chance Baroness Zaradnik?" "I was not aware that I had made a name for myself in the theocracy. Unfortunately, I think no one would know of you by name, Domina. I have heard some stories since I came here, however. Is it true that you destroyed an army of over 100,000 demi-humans recently?" The defense of the upper reaches wasn't very well known in the Sorcerer's Kingdom,
for various reasons. It must have been Themis that had mentioned it to her.
This is true.
Yes. How does this work?
Alessia asked. Does the Sorceress Kingdom not include demi-humans amongst its citizens? Many are counted amongst its citizens, including demi-humans.
It would be simpler to see us as a nation.
Foreign threats are foreign threats, no matter what they are. We should move on to the business at hand. I do not wish to keep you, as you have further trials to prepare for. Further trials? This means that I will be allowed to advance? Yes, of course,
Ludmilla replied.
You will be a gold-rank
adventurer once we are done here.
Alessia released a visible sigh of relief. She raised a hand to scratch her cheek.
I thought I would be castigated, the paladin said. I attacked that girl not just once, but multiple times.
That was one thing I wished to speak with you about, Ludmilla told her, but a reprimand was the furthest thing from my mind. I was curious what drove you to act as you did.
A habit, perhaps.
At my former station, that type does not live for very long. Not only that, but by being idiots they often bring about the end of better men. If one does not immediately act to correct their behavior, it will only bring woe upon everyone else. Ludmilla recalled Alessia's words to Alice in the adventurer training area. The culture of the Adventurer Guild must be hard for you to digest, she said. It should not be long until I catch up with Vicar Aspasia, Alessia replied. After that, we will see. I am hoping that, at that rank, there will be less foolishness and more sense in the heads of these adventurers. She wondered if Alessia's hopes would come to pass. While it was true that more experienced adventurers would have a better grasp of the common sense of their vocation, their self-confidence and sense of empowerment tended to lead to an even more pronounced array of behaviors one might associate with being an adventurer. Historically, it was to the point where high-ranked teams would come to disagreements with one another and foster bad blood over team pride, jealousy, and differences in perspectives and thinking. With the way that the Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild was organized, Ludmilla hoped it was something that would be mitigated. She was, however, under no illusion that personal conflicts wouldn't arise. What is your relation to Vicar Aspasia, by the way? Ludmilla asked. I was summoned from my former post to become her adjutant, Alessia answered. I was honestly quite surprised to find that I would be serving alongside a vicar, but I am pleased to have an assignment with someone close to my age and capabilities. Ludmilla eyed the girl standing across from her. She was fair in appearance and bound to blossom into the very image of an energetic, bright, and beautiful young woman. Like Themis, the driving reason for Alessia's specific presence in Erantle and her involvement in the Adventurer Guild was most likely to create publicity for the temples. That bishop is really... It is nothing, Ludmilla's smile returned. I would very much like to speak to you about a great many things, and I have not seen Vicar Aspasia for weeks. Would the two of you like to join me for dinner at my manor tomorrow? The Paladin. Defenders of the faith. Champions of order and righteousness. The implacable adversary of evil. Through the lens of common perception and bardic lore, paladins are all this and more. Yet, when the definition of good and evil varies by race and culture, where a myriad of gods grace countless pantheons around the world, what it means to be a paladin becomes a point of confusion for those who do not walk its straight and narrow path. Not limited to the human race or even to dwarves and elves, paladins may exist as fearsome beastmen, mysterious myconids, or even mighty dragons. Many question how they can all be considered the same. Why a troll who relishes unborn fetuses served straight from their mothers' bellies as a fine delicacy would be seen as a virtuous paragon, or why a human who indiscriminately raises the settlements of demi-humans would be considered a champion of justice. Indeed, the greatest of paladins are as often seen as dreaded harbingers of ruin by their enemies as they are pillars of righteousness by their allies. To a paladin, the answer is simple and rarely reconsidered. It is the tenets of their faith and their oaths of service that serve as the measure by which all of their actions are determined. Erroneously applying the values of one's own society to a paladin of a different race or religion has often been the cause of a swift and merciless death. Many of the bloodiest conflicts in history have been between nations and alliances of goodly leanings, where paladins of opposing ideologies waged war on one another with unwavering conviction. As a class, paladins are archetypical holy warriors who specialize in defense, sustainability and the destruction of evil opponents. Capable of spellcasting, unleashing an array of powerful skills and performing martial arts, they are a versatile class that can more often than not outlast their adversaries. Though not inherently a commander class, the bastion-like resilience of a paladin, combined with their spells and skills that influence those around them, often places them in the role of officers in a nation's armed forces. Oddly enough, a paladin is at their most effective not when facing enemies without, but those within. In their own societies, good and evil are more easily discerned, and many paladins take on the role of agents assisting in local law enforcement and security. Those in theocratic states may don the mantle of an inquisitor. This does not, however, keep paladins away from where they deem they are needed the most, and they may be found anywhere their faith leads them.